Hi everyone, Dr. R here. I'm going over another EPI question. So let's just dive right in. So can we answer the lead-in? Which of the following types of studies are the researchers most likely conducting? The answer is no. We're going to actually have to come back here and read the stem. Sorry, before we do anything, why don't you pause, hit the pause button right now, and try to answer this question by yourself. And write out why the question answers are correct or incorrect, so that then when we describe and dissect this question, you can come back to it. So hit pause now. Okay, great. Welcome back. So we're going to have to read over the question stem, but first off, I'm going to take a look at the question answer choices. So this is giving different kinds of studies. Comparative, cross-sectional, descriptive, longitudinal, and experimental. So we're going to go through some of these. A team of investigators aims to determine the prevalence. So let's talk about prevalence real quick. Remember that in a previous video, I will describe prevalence here. So the prevalence is the total number that have the disease in a population, so all cases that have the disease at a specific time period. That specific time period is often very small. So in prevalence, we look at a specific time period, so right here in time, and we look at all cases at that specific time period. And in the denominator, we look at the total number of people in the population at that same specific time period. So it would be all the people in the population at that specific time period. Excuse me. Oftentimes we say this as a percentage, but if it's actually quite low, then we might actually have to present it as a per 1,000 population or per 10,000 population. So that's when you start knowing that they're talking about prevalence. Incidence, to contrast that, is actually in the numerator, the number of people who develop the disease over that specific time period. So these are new cases. So what that would look like is over a time period, when we're going down here, they would become a case, they would become a case, they would become a case. And so these would all be in the numerator, right? New cases. And then the denominator would be the population at risk. So all the people here that are at risk of getting the disease, and they would be in the denominator. So if you come back to this, you look at those who developed or new cases at that specific time period, and those who are at risk of the disease during that specific time period. So that's the difference between incidence and prevalence. In this case, we're going to be looking at prevalence, and prevalence happens at this specific time period. And we're looking at anxiety symptoms among university students. Well, I think medical students feel this quite often when we're getting ready for exams, don't we? So this is quite relevant. Among university students without exploring any relationships or differences between the various subgroups. What does that mean? So students, university students, can have subgroups. They can be semester 1, semester 2, and so on. And so these subgroups, we could be looking at, is the anxiety different here compared to here? So is one semester more anxiety producing than the other? Are the exams different? We could also look at ethnicity. Since we have a wonderful broad range of ethnicity happening in med schools now, we can start looking at ethnicity, and we can break these up into different groups, and do different ethnicities have different anxiety. So that's what it's talking about. It's talking about relationships or differences between subgroups, and we are not looking at that. So let's not look at that. And then we go to the lead in. Which of the following types of students are the researchers most likely conducting? So is this a comparative study? Well, right off the bat, it says without exploring any of these relationships, I don't hear anything about trying to compare group 1 with group 2 or any of that. So that is not a likely answer. Cross-sectional study. Does a cross-sectional study look at prevalence? The answer is yes. So a cross-sectional study looks at a specific point in time, and it often looks at the prevalence, which is the total with the disease over the population, and that's often expressed as a percentage. We described that just earlier. So this one is not incorrect, but let's see if it is the most correct. Descriptive study. So what is a descriptive study? So while descriptive studies observe and report phenomena, I would say that a descriptive study, a cross-sectional study, is a descriptive study. But a cross-sectional study is more specific than a descriptive study. So if I said descriptive study, there are several different kinds. You can have a case report, a case series, and you can also have a cross-sectional. So there are multiple different kinds of descriptives, but this is actually very much specific to cross-sectional. So this is correct, but I'm going to say this is more correct. Cross-sectional is more correct than descriptive because it is more specific. Let's go into case report. So case report is reporting on one case about something novel or new, and this might be, and when I say a case, I mean a patient. This might be an outbreak of Ebola, the first case that was reported, and then that was submitted to journals and notifies the academic community. A case series is multiple cases or patients about a novel or new, and so there are several of these in here, and that is a case series. And then the cross-sectional we described here. Now, a longitudinal study, is this a longitudinal study? A longitudinal study would happen over time, and I guess it also could happen retrospectively, but most of them happen prospectively. But it's longitudinal, and that is not happening here because they're actually asking for prevalence, and they're asking that for a specific point in time. So that is not as likely to be the correct one. And experimental, we're not comparing two groups, we're not doing any randomization, we're not doing any kind of experiments at all. So that is not likely. So then, again, let's get back to the most likely, or the most correct, which I believe is the cross-sectional because it is a subset of descriptive and is more specific.